Really quickly though, before we get started with the video, obviously things are a little bit different with like the setup and everything, and I apologize for that. Just bear with me as I go through some things. I just moved, so the setup is different behind me. Maybe the lighting's a little bit different. I'm obviously sitting down in the chair, so just bear with me as things change a little bit there. Welcome back everybody, my name is Tucker, and today's video is a continuation of my NBA season preview series for the 2019-20 NBA season, and this one covers the Charlotte Hornets. The Hornets went 39-43 last season, their third consecutive season with 36 or more wins, but also without a playoff appearance. And in the offseason, they also lost their two top scorers from that team a year ago, which is setting up what will likely be a very tough season for their team, their franchise, and their fans. But first up, let's go ahead and review their offseason. And the first notable addition to talk about here is, of course, Terry Rozier. He came over from the Celtics in kind of a sign and trade situation with Kemba Walker, but essentially he was a free agent acquisition by them, even though they didn't have the salary cap space because, again, it was a sign and trade situation. Now, this is one of the more interesting additions of the offseason because, again, I think opinions are going to vary pretty wildly on this. There are a lot of people that for some reason are still very high on the potential and the play and the potential star power, I guess, of Terry Rozier. I'm not one of those people. There's been very little evidence outside of the playoff run that the Celtics made 2 postseasons ago now, and the play that Rozier exhibited in those playoff games. There's very little evidence outside of that he is even a quality starting point guard in the league, much less any kind of star, and even at times barely even a good reserve point guard. Keep in mind that before the Celtics made that playoff run, before Kyrie Irving got hurt and all of those things occurred that allowed Rozier to become kind of a more common name around the NBA, he really wasn't that big a part of the Celtics rotation during that season because they had guys like Shane Larkin and, of course, Kyrie Irving. So I'm not one of those people that's going to get wildly excited about this addition by the Charlotte Hornets, but I do completely understand if you are one of those people and you think that Terry Rozier is going to be good. He does have some shot making skill, some playmaking skill, is a good athlete, and he's got a little bit of just confidence and kind of shake and bake in his game that could make you think that maybe he's going to be something. But probably what's happening here is just the Hornets don't have a ton of talent on their team, and Rozier is going to be one of the more talented players on their roster for them, unfortunately, and people are just kind of reaching for straws and thinking how this Hornets team could actually be decent this upcoming season. The best way to do that is say Terry Rozier is going to be good for them. Again, I'm just not one of those people. And then the other player in terms of additions is their first round draft pick, PJ Washington. Now, he is someone that's going to be a good combo forward for them, should be a good two-way player, offense and defense, can score well inside, should be able to work on his perimeter game a little bit, but is mostly going to be kind of a mid-post, mid-range post scorer, then obviously scoring around the paint. A good athlete, but again, kind of similar to how Hornets draft picks have gone over the last couple of seasons. They never really lose enough games to get a top tier player, and when they did, they got guys like Cody Zeller, and they got guys like Michael Kidd-Gilchrist. PJ Washington could potentially be just another draft pick in the late lottery by the Hornets, like players like Frank Kaminsky they've gotten, and players like that. Now, I will say that I'm slightly more excited about him than I have been about some of their other draft picks just because of his versatility and his scoring upside, and he's someone that can actually score the ball well and isn't just kind of a complimentary option. But I'm not getting too excited about him for this Hornets team until I actually see him play for them and contribute in a highly positive way, mostly because I'm skeptical of their draft picks until they prove me wrong, just given their draft history outside of basically Kemba Walker in the last 10 or so years. Speaking of Kemba Walker, we now move on to subtractions, and he is obviously going to be the first one that I'm going to talk about. One of the best players in franchise history, their leading scorer last year, one of their only all-stars in franchise history, and someone that is obviously hugely important to this team and is a huge loss. They're attempting to try and replace him, I guess, with Terry Rozier, and you can get into all the offseason specifics and how it wasn't really a good idea to give Kemba Walker a full supermax or a max contract, and the fact that they weren't willing to give him that made him want to look at other opportunities, ultimately landed on the Celtics, and I get all that stuff. And at the end, it may have been a smarter move at the end of the day to get rid of Kemba Walker, not sign him, and then bring in Terry Rozier if he ends up being good. But I would just go back to a season ago or 2 seasons ago when it was clear that Kemba Walker was going to be a sought-after free agent. I don't know why they didn't trade him before then. But again, all of that stuff out of the way, it's obviously going to be a big loss for them, as is the next subtraction, Jeremy Lamb. This is the other guy that I was talking about in the beginning of the video when I said that they lost their 2 leading scorers. Jeremy Lamb is the other leading scorer, someone that hasn't always been a great or super consistent player, but in Charlotte has been good, even though maybe you could make the case that it's just because they don't have a ton of other scoring talent on this team and they have to rely on him. I'm interested to see how he plays in Indiana this upcoming season, but obviously Charlotte will miss his playmaking, his scoring, and his shooting on a team that's going to need a lot of help in those areas. The next subtraction is going to be Tony Parker, who obviously retired. He was actually a pretty good player for them in the backcourt at times, playing with Kemba, and just provided them a good veteran presence, someone that can play make, obviously really good in ball screens, can score a little bit, wasn't a great defender. You guys know everything that Tony Parker brings to the table, and it is going to be a loss for them not having him, but at the same time, once we get to the depth chart, you'll see that they do actually have a good amount of young guards that they would want to prioritize playing over Parker anyway, so not a huge loss there. And then last up, again, not a huge loss, Frank Kaminsky, who is now with the Phoenix Suns. He was someone that helped them a little bit in the front court with spacing, but was never really the kind of player that they hoped that he would be initially when they drafted him back in 2015. Just never really caught on with the team, obviously, because he didn't sign another contract after his rookie contract. Not a huge loss there, but I guess they lose a little bit of front court depth. But again, as we get to the depth chart, you'll see that it really won't matter that much. Moving on now, let's talk about the Hornets depth chart. For me, I've got Rozier, Monk, Bridges, Washington, and then Zeller. And then off the bench, Graham, Bacon, Batum, Williams, Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, and then Bismack Biyombo backing him up at the 5, backing up Zeller at the 5. And the interesting thing about this team specifically at first glance is how interchangeable their backcourt players are. Like Rozier and Bacon and Monk and Graham all can kind of do some stuff on the ball. Bacon not so much as the other 3. And then all of them can play off the ball as well. So they're relatively interchangeable if you want to play any of them at the 1 or the 2. I also wouldn't be surprised to see them attempt some 3-guard lineups with potentially Malik Monk playing at the 3 spot. So that is at least a positive, where maybe not these guys might not be like super high level playmakers and things like that, but at least you're going to have one on the floor almost at all times. So Graham and Bacon and Monk and Rozier, all those guys should have their fair share of playmaking responsibilities, although obviously Rozier being the big addition is going to be the primary playmaker and ball handler and scorer. In my opinion, at least, it seems like that's the way it's going to be going into this season. And the other 2 interesting guys to talk about in this backcourt rotation, the first is Dwayne Bacon, who I'll talk about later, but the other is Malik Monk, who we've been kind of waiting on his breakout moment basically since he was drafted, because he was such an exciting and talented college player and someone that I was dead wrong about, at least to this point in his career. I thought he was going to be really good, and that just hasn't happened to this point, but he should get plenty of opportunities again in this offense without Lamb, without Kemba, and with Rozier trying to replace those 2 guys. They're going to need offense out of Malik Monk. He should get plenty of opportunities. So if he is going to break out, if he is going to end up being a good player in the NBA, this is the year that we're probably going to end up finding out. And then one other point on the backcourt before I move on to the rest of the roster, I want to touch a little bit more on the Rozier stuff, because I said in the beginning that I'm really not anticipating great things from him. I'm going to double down on that here and just reiterate how bad I think this is probably going to go in Terry Rozier's first season. I am anticipating some truly awful shooting splits from Terry Rozier in his first season in Charlotte, just given how much responsibility he's probably going to have on offense. He's never been a terribly efficient player in the first place, and then just a relative lack of talent around him. The attention that he's going to get defensively is just really not going to be great at all for his play this upcoming season. So again, really not anticipating big things from him. In terms of the front court, there's actually some really good depth here. You've got Bridges, who I'll talk about later. Then you've got Batum and Washington, Williams, MKG, Zeller, and Biyombo. Again, none of those guys are super high level players at the moment, but they do at least have depth and the ability to interchange some of those guys. I'm especially interested in how Michael Kidd-Gilchrist not only plays this year, but potentially as a trade piece, because he is an expiring contract and someone that could help some teams around the league that are pushing for the playoffs because of his versatility, his ability to play either the 4 or even the 5 in small ball lineups, and then obviously being a very good defender, despite the fact that he can't really shoot the ball at all. In terms of the Hornets themselves, it's really going to depend on how well Washington plays, and if he doesn't play especially well, then someone like Bridges or Batum or Williams is going to take up more of his minutes at the 4 spot. But as of right now, just given the fact that this is supposed to be a developmental year for the Hornets, I'm penciling him in as a starting 4, and then at the 5 spot, there's really nothing to talk about except for obviously Zeller and Biyombo being there, and a little bit of MKG potential small ball 5 minutes. And now we move on to the players to watch section. And the first one, I said I was going to talk about him later, is Dwayne Bacon. He is someone that on paper should be a good NBA player. This is a guy that if you're talking about the Hornets on YouTube or on Twitter and you're talking about their team as a whole and you don't mention Dwayne Bacon, this is the guy that Hornets fans get upset at you for not talking about, because they think he's really good and nobody ever really talks about him. And I would tend to agree. As long as he can stay on the floor, which has been his biggest issue to this point in his career, played less than 50 games last year, whether that was just because he didn't play or because he was hurt, that is going to be an issue for him continually. Is a solid defender, but not a great two-way player, and someone that shoots the ball well from three, but on limited volume. So again, if he gets the opportunities this upcoming season, that is a player certainly to watch. And again, Hornets fans would tell you the exact same thing. And the other player to watch on this Hornets team is Miles Bridges, in my opinion. Now, he didn't have an outstanding rookie season from a statistical standpoint. Certainly had a lot of highlights, certainly was someone that got some attention in his 20 to 22 minutes a game that he played on a per game basis, but he just really didn't do maybe as much as you thought he would given his draft position as a rookie from a statistical standpoint. Now, he certainly, showed some promise, but the issue is that he still needs to be a better shooter, and he, even though he's an outstanding athlete, doesn't have great size or length to be like a really, really good defender. So if he can continue to improve from a skill set standpoint and then continue obviously to be an outstanding athlete, he should be a pretty good player for this Hornets team. I don't really think that he has all-star caliber potential or ceiling, at least in my opinion, but he is one of the more promising draft picks that the Hornets have brought in over the last couple of seasons. And again, someone that is at least more exciting than someone like Frank Kaminsky or guys like that they've drafted over the last couple of seasons. So keep an eye on him. It would be huge if either of these players, Bacon or Bridges, really took a step forward this year and maybe had a bit of a breakout season. That would be huge, not only for the Hornets this upcoming season, but also just for their future as well. Moving on now to expectations and predictions. This one probably won't take me all that long. Expectations, they're not going to be a playoff team. That shouldn't be an expectation for them at all. And then predictions, I've got them between 19 and 22 wins and one of the worst teams in the Eastern Conference. And things could be wildly different this time next year. Like, they could be so bad that they get the first overall pick and then they've got that star and they've got these complementary players around that star. That's absolutely a possibility. But this team, even though they've got interesting pieces like I've talked about throughout the entire video, they just don't have that star power anymore. And even when they had these complementary options like they did last year, and they still had the star power with Kemba Walker, they still didn't make the playoffs last year either. So with the loss of Kemba and bringing in Terry Rozier, the loss of Jeremy Lamb and bringing in PJ Washington, I'm just not seeing the talent on this team. I do think they could be an interesting team within the next few seasons. They just have to be bad enough to get a top 3 pick or somewhere in that range and then pick the proper players, because they haven't really fully committed to that kind of tanking attitude since Kemba Walker has really emerged as an all-star caliber player. And then really the last couple of times they've gotten high picks were MKG and then Cody Zeller. So I would anticipate them really committing to the tank this year and trying to get at least a top 3 pick, hope the lottery ping pong balls fall their way. And then, like I said, this time next year, things could look wildly different for this team. They've got good complementary options. They just don't have the true star power, at least in my opinion, unless you're thinking that Terry Rozier is going to be that guy. But that is going to be the end of today's video previewing the Charlotte Hornets upcoming NBA season. I thank you guys very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.